Welcome to Part 3 of The Reach. In Part 1 of The Reach, I described the lands of the Reach and its legendary figure, Garth Greenhand, whose children almost all houses in this area claim descent from. However, it was Garth Greenhand's firstborn and greatest child, Garth the Gardener, that became the most important for much of the Reach's history. Which led us to Part 2, where I talked about the first men coming to the Reach and settling down, and the Gardener Kings and how they ruled this realm, stopping right before the Andals began their invasion on Westeros. So this video, let's talk about the Reach during the time of the Andal invasion. So I ended Part 2 talking about the greatest king to rule the Reach, King Garth the 7th Gardener, called Garth Goldenhand or the Golden Hand. Under him, this area experienced a golden reign lasting 3/4 of a century that the Reach would never see again. When he passed at the age of 93 after ruling for 81 years, the throne passed to his great-grandson. After his great-grandson's sons took the throne, the Andals came to Westeros. And let's just briefly recap the Andals, just in case you're a little rusty on your Song of Ice and Fire history. Some 4,000 to 6,000 years before the time of the books, the Andals started their invasion of Westeros, where once they had called Andalos their home, with the growing conquest of the Valyrians and knowing slavery was only a matter of time, they fled to Westeros where they knew they would be free and able to worship the Seven. Unfortunately, this event of fleeing and the conflict with the Valyrians had put them in a zealous state. The Andal warriors started to carve the seven-pointed star into their bodies, and when they arrived in Westeros, they swore to make their kingdoms on this new continent. And as the faith of the Seven is the dominant religion in the Seven Kingdoms in modern A Song of Ice and Fire time, and most, not all, have Andal blood in them, we know they were pretty successful in this endeavor. Due to where they landed, the Vale took the hardest hit from them. The first men with their bronze weapons could not withstand the iron weapons and armor of the Andals, and slowly the First Men kingdoms began to fall. Again, not all, but most. The Andals would continue to spread war and carve out their kingdoms. In some areas, they were pushed back. In other areas, they dominated. And in other areas, words were used to make peace and join with the Andals. Due to where the Reach is located, it shouldn't be surprising that the Andals came to their land much later in the game. Surely the Andals knew of the wealth and power of Highgarden, and the fertile goodness of the Reach, but there was a lot of land and kingdoms between the Andals and them. While their longships had first landed on the shores of the Vale, and then all along the eastern coast, the fleets of the Arbor and Old Town had barred them from the Sunset Sea and the Red Wine Straits. So we see the location of the Reach gave the Gardener Kings and their people a huge advantage. They could observe what happened in the Vale, the Stormlands, and the Riverlands, learning from those realms' mistakes and battles. The people of the Reach had heard of some of the First Men kingdoms attempting to ally with the Andals to take out other rival First Men kingdoms, and the disaster that resulted from it. Because of that, those of the Reach made no attempt to ally with the Andals to take out other kingdoms. Instead, different Gardener Kings prepared in their own way. Gwaine IV, known as the Gods Fearing, sent his warriors to attempt to find the Children of the Forest, despite his ancestors having mostly driven them out of the Reach. Gwaine believed that the Children's Greenseers and their magic could stop the Andal invaders. Next, King Mern II, known as the Mason, thought to make their homes more secure. He built a new curtain wall around Highgarden and commanded all his lords' bannermen to attend to their own defenses, to prepare for the coming Andals, whenever they managed to finally get down to the Reach. We know during this time that Lord Hightower made the walls of Old Town stronger, and that Lord Redwine built more ships. Lastly, we know King Mern III, the Madling, you can already guess from his name he's going to be a little out there, decided to give gold and honors to a woods witch who made a claim that she could raise armies of the dead to throw the Andals back. I'm sure you can also make an educated guess how well that promise was upheld. But the funny thing is, despite all their preparation for the coming of the Andals to the Reach, by the time the Andals actually got there, it wasn't the bloodbath they had expected. It took generations for the Andals to conquer the eastern shores and come to the Reach, and by then the Andals had already raised up 40 petty kings of their own that, of course, were now fighting with each other. Sound like the first men when they first came to Westeros, right? Thankfully, when the Andals were finally ready to come to this area, the Reach saw the 3 Sage Kings sit on their oaken seat at Highgarden. These 3 Sage Kings were Garth the 9th Gardener, his son Merle I, known as the Meek, and his grandson, Gwaine V. All 3 men, when they sat as King of the Reach, had a common attitude and policy towards the Andals. Instead of fighting them and spilling blood, to bring the Andals into the Reach through assimilation and accord. All 3 men made sure to bring Andals into their service as household knights and retainers, which is actually how the Tyrells became stewards of the Gardener Kings. Sir Alistair Tyrell, an Andal knight and adventurer, had such skill at arms that he became the most honored knight, being made King Gwaine V's champion and sworn shield. Alistair Tyrell's descendants would go on to continue serving the Gardener Kings, and eventually be given the hereditary title of Steward of Highgarden. The Gardeners would do more to integrate the Andals and their ways into the Reach, though. They actively sought out Andal craftsmen and urged their bannermen to do so as well. Andal blacksmiths and stonemasons were greatly desired and paid very well for their services. Why wouldn't the first men do so? Andal blacksmiths were able to teach the first men to arm and armor themselves with iron, vastly superior to the first men's bronze weapons and armor, making them even stronger, and also allowing them to keep up with the other areas that already had these techniques. But not only that, the stonemasons helped those of the Reach strengthen their defenses. Again, this not only made the Andals more integrated into their society, as the 3 Sage Kings wanted, but helped the Reach become even more secure. But that isn't all the 3 Sage Kings did to make peace, not war, with the Andals. Merle I and Gwaine V took Andal maidens to be their wives to ensure their fathers were bound to their realm and wouldn't attack. Obviously, the 3 Sage Kings couldn't marry all the powerful Andal Kings' daughters, so for the more powerful ones coming to the Reach, the 3 Sage Kings gave lands and lordships to them in return for pledges of loyalty. Now, not all the new lords kept their vows, but most did. The ones that did would be a great aid to the Gardener Kings when Andal Kings and warriors that didn't care to make peace with the Reach came to fight. These Andal lords that had sworn loyalty to the Gardeners joined them not only in fighting these later kings and warriors, but putting down any rebellions from the still newish-made Andal lords that weren't keen on keeping their promises. Thanks to the Gardener Kings giving lands and wives to these Andal adventurers, many noble houses from this area in modern A Song of Ice and Fire time can trace their ancestry to the Andals. As the years would go on, and in centuries, the houses intermarried so much that the Andal and First Men blood were thoroughly bonded, and soon you couldn't tell any differences. But the 3 Sage Kings didn't stop there. As the Andal's faith was the 7, Garth brought a septon to his court to make him part of his councils. Not only that, but he had the first sept at Highgarden built, despite still worshipping the old gods. His son Merle took this a step further. Growing up around the faith of the 7, he became devout and dedicated his time as king to funding the buildings of septs, mother houses, and septeries all over the Reach, which led to Gwaine V being the first ever gardener born in the faith of the 7, and the first to become a knight by solemn rite and vigil. Now, if you remember the other parts of the Reach series, you know that the Reach claims they created knighthood and have legendary figures that were supposedly knights before the Andals ever came to Westeros. Despite this, Maesters still believe knights did not come to Westeros until the Andals did, thousands of years after the Reach and these legendary figures were already dead. The Maesters believe that this is because knighthood was given to certain people after their death by singers and storytellers, and that they weren't actually true knights. I guess depending on your definition of knight, anything could be true. So the 3 Sage Kings successfully brought the Andals into their realm in what Maesters believe was achieved with surprisingly little bloodshed. I particularly like the Gardener King's thoughts on this. The Maesters report the words of 2 of the 3 Sage Kings. First, King Garth IX said, "When a wolf descends upon your flocks, all you gain by killing him is a short respite, for other wolves will come. If instead you feed the wolf and tame him and turn his pups into your guard dogs, they will protect the flocks when the pack comes." But King Gwaine V seemed a bit more grateful instead of arrogant, stating, "They gave us 7 gods. We gave them dirt and daughters, and our sons and grandsons shall be as brothers. Of course, as we know in our own history, great and wise kings and rulers aren't always followed by the best and brightest. Though some Gardner kings after the 3 sage kings were strong and clever, they were also weak and foolish men, even a woman, and none had the 3 sage kings' abilities or wisdom. After the Andals' arrival and before Aegon I's conquest, the Reach would be engulfed in war as Gardner kings fought for power, glory, and land against, and sometimes with, the Storm Kings, the Kings of the Rock, the many Kings of Dorne, and the Kings of the Rivers and Hills. So let's talk about the Reach with the Andals successfully interwoven with the First Men, the wars that followed, the shitty kings that followed, and the end of the Gardner Kings and the rise of the Tyrells in Part 4. Thanks for watching, please like, subscribe, and come back for more videos.